The accident that sets the plot in motion began with a relic that once belonged to the protagonist's mother. When it fell to the ground, the artifact shattered, sending shards of glass flying everywhere, and painful memories surged in the poor girl's mind like boiling water in a kettle. In these memories, a man named Yoon Ji-yul firmly declared that the young woman would regret something we still don't know at this point. Suddenly, when she opened her terrified eyes, the young maiden found herself in a strangely modernized environment. She, dressed in her medieval attire amidst Shine's casual looks, panicked as a car zoomed past her. An old woman offered help to the frightened girl standing on the sidewalk, but the young woman refused any assistance, even though she was in a universe where she had no clue what anything around her meant. Furthermore, when she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a shop window, the woman was someone entirely different, her long, straight brown hair replacing her usual blonde curls. However, the schizoid trip didn't last more than a blink, as the maiden was soon thrust back into her original world, where the maids around her were calling her by the name Lady Elodie and begging for forgiveness for something they supposedly did. Hearing her name repeated over and over, Elodie's memories slowly began to return, and soon enough, she started sweating as she recalled that somehow it was the end. These were memories of her past life. Her name is Elodie Purdia, a typical noblewoman from the medieval Western world, though one fact sets her apart from other women of her social standing. Elodie is the illegitimate daughter of Duke Purdia. In other words, her father had ventured into the wrong cave and brought to life this beautiful, blessed figure with crimson eyes. Until then, Elodie had never experienced such strange and vivid visions. But when her mother's relic fell and shattered, she was immediately hurled into a distant memory from a past life. Unless, of course, she was merely assuming it was another life, for aside from the basic answer of 1 + 1, certainty no longer existed in anything at all. However, a vague recollection in her mind reminded her of a phase in her previous life, when she had read a novel called The Adopted Daughter of the Villainous Family Becomes Beloved. Apparently, she was embodying the character from that tale, which might have been great, except for the fact that the blonde was an impulsive brat who constantly messed up everyone's lives for her own satisfaction. Maybe because of that, or maybe not, Elodie Purdia ended up dying young. Now, trapped in the skin of this insufferable lady, the woman realized she was doomed. As memories from both her past life and this medieval noble existence began to flood back, along with all the trouble she had caused the poor maids of her luxurious mansion and the grotesque flaunting of wealth in a Sasha Meneghel style from the Middle Ages, Elodie knew she needed to find a way to redeem herself before someone sought vengeance and put her 6 feet under. However, setting things straight, she remembered she wasn't killed for being obnoxious, but because of her father, Duke Purdia, the most ruthless villain in the world. Being a cold-hearted scoundrel, he didn't even care about his daughter's death, according to the novel, since the true heroine of this story was Estelle Purdia, who had been adopted for political reasons. Yet, thanks to her stunning beauty, Estelle charmed the family, earning the green pass to everyone's heart, and ultimately ended up happily married. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a romantic fantasy story with a healing fiction genre, whatever that means. Elodie had become engaged to the first prince, but due to her reputation as an unbearable pest, the engagement was cancelled. Her father was the head of the Purdia ducal family, known for their cruelty. The duke had tried to strengthen his power by aligning with the first prince, so he adopted Estelle to be his trophy daughter, a charming girl with the right looks who could melt the heart of the young nobleman, thus securing a marriage between the two. Speaking of Duke Purdia, Elodie knew she needed to stay as far away as possible from this madman, but if she tried to run away, she'd surely be captured. So, she decided to leave the house and live an independent life before Estelle's adoption turned everything upside down. Of course, the family wouldn't take that lightly, but Elodie would have to do whatever she could. Her first step was to end her engagement to that silver-haired, green-eyed heartthrob. Elodie would have loved to live alongside that pretty face, but she figured not being killed was more important. So she wrote a letter addressed to the first prince. Without delay, the message reached the hands of Ademir Prezelwallen, affectionately called Ademir by all. He thought his beloved was sending a note about the emperor's birthday banquet they were planning. But reality hit him like a nail-studded club as he read those painful words requesting the end of their engagement. Unsure of how to react, Ademir thought someone was messing with him. Also, without delay, Elodie was summoned to face the one person she most wanted to avoid, Duke Purdia. His first words were, "There's a problem." Those words echoed like pins through the maiden's mind, her clenched backside locking up tighter than a Wi-Fi signal in a cave. Her mind raced, thinking of all the potential scoldings her father might unleash. Whether it was about something foolish she had done with the maids, or because she had sold the golden dinner set to buy skins in League of Legends. Then, Sylvester Perdue broke the silence, mentioning the breakup letter Elodie had sent, as the first prince had come to him, whining like Kiko to Dona Florinda. Sylvester always covered up for his daughter's missteps, but this time it was different because Elodie had wanted this engagement in the first place. She had thought it would be okay since her father had opposed the marriage before, but he made it clear that things had changed. In Elodie's mind, this was an engagement neither the first prince nor the duke wanted, so it would be easy to break it off. However, her father informed her that she would be put on a probationary period, just like in the Brazilian labor law, to see if marrying her to Ademir was worth it or not. Setting that aside, Elodie asked if he had anything else to say, but Sylvester dismissed her, telling her to reflect on her actions. With that, she excused herself and left the duke's office. As she stepped out of the room, Elodie let out the tension that had been running up her spine the entire conversation, but at least she had gotten off with a much lighter punishment than she had expected. After all, she had been the one to push for this marriage in the first place. In any case, now that her father had decided to continue with the engagement, it meant the duke supported the prince, which was the double-edged sword Elodie didn't want. Still, she had 3 years before Estelle was adopted, giving her time not to act too hastily. It was good she thought of that after trying to end her engagement just 20 minutes into this world. Regardless, she needed to be able to live independently, no matter the cost. However, this desire soon became a challenge as the world she now inhabited, in a distant past, had once been brought to the brink of total devastation by beings known as the 7 Deadly Sins. Serving the underworld goddess Irkalla, who coveted both heaven and earth, the 7 sins brought death and destruction across the continent at her command. Then, as the entire world fell to its knees before this malevolent figure, Ishtar, the younger sister of Irkalla and the goddess of heaven and earth, descended to save it. Ishtar chose 7 mortals and bestowed upon them special powers with her blessing, so they could defeat and seal the 7 deadly sins. The heroes of Ishtar emerged victorious and were celebrated as saviors, and each one of them founded a noble house in their name. Thus, the legend of the foundation behind the Wallachia Empire was born. Today, only 5 of the 7 houses remain, including the Imperial House, and among them, the Perdue House is known as the guardian of the blessing of destruction. After that bit of backstory about the ceiling under which Elodie lives her plot, the girl was walking through the mansion's hallways when she ran into 2 people she had been expecting to bump into eventually, Yancey and Carl, her brothers. The taller one was the firstborn of the Duke and heir to the Perdue House, while Carlet was the second. Yancey asked about the engagement breakup, a fact Elodie confirmed with a big smile. Carl, on the other hand, suggested that she had been dumped by the prince, which infuriated the woman internally, though for some reason she responded by saying the boy wasn't wrong. The older brother wanted to know if their father had been too upset with her, but she happily reported that the man had gone easy on her with a punishment of staring at the wall for half an hour. Calling his sister affectionately by her nickname Lily, the man was relieved, having thought the Duke would tear her apart. Or perhaps not. As the direct heir to the Perdue lineage, Yancey bore a blessing running through his veins with only one purpose: obliteration. His power to erase the existence of things certainly frightened their enemies, but the greatest danger he posed was in his character. Despite his outward appearance of being a calm and good-natured man, Yancey Perdue hid behind that mask a cold and manipulative heart, with the sole aim of trampling over anyone who got in his way, as long as it benefited him. In other words, the man was the devil in disguise. Lily tried to resist his good guy charm, while Carl suggested his sister see a psychologist to fix her scrambled head. Furious, Elodie threatened to smack her brother with her own fist until Yancey reprimanded the younger sibling, reminding him that they should all honor their bloodline and care for their family, though Carl made sure to point out that Lily wasn't exactly blood of our blood. Glancing sideways at Lily, Yancey replied that Ishtar had not only given him one brother, but 2 beloved little ones to complete the family. Trying to maintain her role as the good sister, Lily froze inside at the coldness that exuded from the man's words, which were as fake as a $3 bill. So, to escape the situation, she excused herself, saying she needed to retreat to the annex. As she left, Carl commented that he almost threw up the steak and fries from lunch because his sister was acting even weirder than usual, an opinion his older brother agreed with, though he didn't know why exactly. As children, both brothers had manifested their blessings from Ishtar, passed down to all direct descendants of Valentia's founding houses, except for Elodie. Not having received any power, the logical explanation was that Perdia's blood didn't run through the veins of the adopted daughter. And although she was publicly known as the Duke's illegitimate daughter, she wasn't even that. Not a drop of pure lineage flowed in this hatchling. And Elodie knew very well that she needed to gain her independence before this secret was exposed, because if the truth came out, things would definitely heat up. Perhaps due to the immense pressure she was feeling, thinking there had to be a silver lining to this whole mess, the girl let out a little chuckle while standing alone in a corner of the garden, making the maids think she had a screw loose. In her frantic little mind, Lily wouldn't have known this without recovering her past life memories, but now she understood that one day she would receive the blessing from her biological parents. And it wasn't just any blessing. It was the blessing of purification, granted to the house of Duke Severus, a house that proudly bore the image of a stag on its crest. However, far from the heroic narrative this possibility could provide, the reality presented in the novel was of a young noblewoman who was discovered not to be a Perdia and thus condemned to become a memory. In every timeline, the wretched woman ended up dead for being the Duke's fake daughter. To top it off, Duke Richard Severus, her biological father, was in a deep coma with no signs of waking up. Without any backup from her father in this mess, all Elodie Severus could do was hide her blessing as best she could once it manifested, using it to secure her freedom before she was exposed. Amidst these reflections, Lily walked into the Perdia Duchess's stunning garden, which had more than just a few mortal dangers behind its beauty. Still, it was in this place that the maiden decided to start her bid for freedom. Just at the entrance to the garden, the young woman was greeted by Demis Perdia, wife of Duke Sylvester and biological mother to Yancy and Carlet. Above all, Demis was the greatest poison expert in all of Valentia. Elodie responded to the greeting and suggested they stroll together through the glass greenhouse while discussing a particularly interesting matter, all related to the excellent work that Duchess Demis did with her toxic concoctions. Accepting the girl's invitation, Demis warned beforehand that the greenhouse harbored dangerously dangerous dangers inside, and the girl shouldn't touch anything without permission. Lily, for her part, remained calm, as she had no intention of losing a finger before securing her independence. So, as they walked along the red carpet leading into the greenhouse, the Duchess asked what the conversation was about. Lily explained that she had heard a rumor about an order given by the Imperial Palace to the Duke's wife. She found it very unfair that common farmers had ordered the destruction of all the stock of insecticides that the woman had developed to help them with their work. Demis felt grateful for the sentiment, but concluded that there was no use crying over spilled milk. Besides, the regulatory authorities had already issued a warning. If Demis continued to sell substances toxic to human health, prison awaited her. And that's where Lily came in, according to her. Faced with Demis's blank stare, the young lady handed over a vial containing a yellow substance, generating even more confusion in the Duchess's mind. Elodie explained that the vial held the solution to the problem, an antidote called Antitoxin Colony, Elodie Perdia Edition. With this, Demis could apply an anti-agent to remove the harmful effects of the insecticide, while Lily could make some money to achieve her big goal, to become independent and leave the Perdia household as soon as possible. Initially skeptical, Demis asked if Elodie really believed what she was saying, as it seemed more like another one of her pranks. In response, Lily invited her to test the product, and if it didn't work, she would guarantee a refund. So, without further ado, Demis took the solution and asked the girl to come closer. When Lily did, Demis asked what she saw inside the vial. Lily was perplexed to see a wriggling worm, but Demis corrected her, saying it was a grub, the nasty little creature causing all the trouble. Not only did it tear through the soil, but it was as resistant as a cockroach and reproduced like a rabbit. With that, the Duchess wasted no time and poured poison into the container, suffocating the grub until it died dramatically. Then, she took Elodie's antidote and added it to see if the grub would come back to life under the influence of the insecticide. At that moment, Elodie felt her heart in her throat. Not because she doubted her product, but because watching it tested in front of her gave her a case of nerves, you know? So, she silently prayed for God to resurrect the worm, just like he had done with Jesus Christ. After all, like Jesus of Nazareth, humanity depended on this little worm, not to mention the small fortune Lily would make if everything went according to plan. She closed her eyes in reverence, and after a brief prayer, she opened them slowly, only to see the grub revive, stumbling around like her stepfather after arriving home on a Friday night when she was a kid. With that, Elodie celebrated, exclaiming that her antidote had worked wonders on that nasty poison. Since she had been the one to develop the insecticide, Demis gave her a hard stare, and Lily immediately turned her own embarrassed face away, trying not to catch a glimpse of her shame reflected in the Duchess's eyes. However, Demis wasn't actually angry, quite the opposite. She was impressed with what the girl had managed to create, whatever method she had used. In fact, she even commented that the girl had always been timid and fearful around her, but now things had changed. Still, the Duchess made it clear that such an antidote deserved a generous reward. Overjoyed, Elodie asked for one condition: that Demis sell the antidote in her own name, not in Elodie's. In exchange, she wanted to share the profits. Demis asked what kind of shady deal this was, hiding her name, and Lily explained that no one would ever believe she had developed the antidote. Moreover, she wasn't fond of drawing attention to herself, so she preferred to keep it low-key. In reality, this was the only way Elodie could disappear without a trace when the time came, but she couldn't even think of telling that to anyone, or she'd surely become a headline. So, Demis gave her a scrutinizing look to check if there was any catch in this deal, but eventually shrugged it off and agreed. After all, she had nothing to lose, except maybe her entire reputation if people found out she was falsely selling a product under her name when someone else had developed it. Now, she just needed to know one thing. How on earth had this girl created such a potion? Elodie explained that her blessing had manifested, and she now had the power to neutralize the harmful effects of poison. To be more precise, her blessing purified the poison rather than destroyed it. But Lily kept that little detail to herself. In the original novel, Elodie hatched a plan to poison Estelle, but in the end, she ended up drinking the poison herself and digging her own grave. However, her blessing prevented her from falling into that pit, allowing her to survive the ordeal. The biggest problem was that the revelation of her power had exposed to everyone that she wasn't a true Perdia. Demis, for her part, thought discovering the blessing was a reason to celebrate rather than keep it a secret. But Elodie made up an excuse, saying she didn't want to make the entire kingdom marvel at her talents and risk losing her cherished role as the subservient female in a cursed adoptive family. With that, Demis didn't need to worry, as Lily would do everything she could to maintain her anonymity and, consequently, the life of her dreams as a legitimate, original, and true daughter of the Duke of Perdia. With that, Demis agreed and dropped the matter, realizing it was the least she could do for her new business partner. However, the next day, Elodie woke up looking paler than a palm tree left in the sun for 13 days. One of the maids noticed how terrible she looked and commented that the poor girl was in worse shape than her Kala after visiting Madame Demis. With a voice as hoarse as a chain-smoking ant, Lily weakly called out to her maid, Martha, but didn't have the strength to continue speaking. Martha, tearfully scolding her mistress, lamented that she couldn't wander around that venomous death trap of a greenhouse, or her skin would end up looking like a rough plastered wall, and the only thing she was good for was being pretty. Moreover, Martha expressed concern for her mistress's health, because if she kicked the bucket, who would pay her salary? Elodie retorted that if Martha weren't the daughter of her former nanny, she would have fired the girl ages ago. And in case the maid was also worried about the madam, Lily made it clear that Demis was still as young and beautiful as ever. Martha didn't doubt that for a second, as the woman never seemed to age, to the point where she could be mistaken for Lily's sister. With that said, the noblewoman rose from her bed as if she had been resurrected, and her maid took the opportunity to inform her that a guest was waiting for her. Puzzled, Lily hadn't expected anyone to want to see her for any reason, something with which Martha, as her best friend, had to agree. Regardless, the guest couldn't wait, so Elodie had to pick up the pace. After all, they were talking about none other than His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince of Valencia. Upon hearing that, Elodie descended the stairs with the grace of an elephant under attack by a gang of hippos. Approaching the visitor, she apologized for keeping him waiting. The prince didn't seem to mind the madness of the young lady and asked her to join him for a conversation. But before the conversation could begin, Lily reiterated that her request to annul the engagement was legitimate. Then, after biting, she attempted to soothe the wound by apologizing for forcing the gentleman into marrying her, though she reminded him that he had initially refused. However, the man didn't take kindly to this slap of facts to his face, his brow darkening with fury, as he criticized the selfishness of the young lady, suggesting that her behavior wasn't befitting of Elodie Perdia. As far as he was concerned, it was more likely that Lily was possessed than that she was deliberately throwing the marriage down the drain. Keeping up her polite facade, she swallowed her anger and acted as if the prince had made some sort of joke, but he didn't believe everything was fine, as her skin looked like styrofoam insulation from a construction site, which he made sure to point out. Despite feeling offended by everyone's comments on her poor skin condition, the girl couldn't express her frustration, as that would go against the etiquette expected of her. Furthermore, she brought up that her father was also opposed to the annulment of the marriage, and since she depended on those guys for everything, Elodie asked the prince to say something sensible to change the duke's mind, as he never listened to her. Before responding, Adamir wanted to know why she had requested the annulment out of the blue, so Elodie paused for a moment to take a breath and said she had fallen in love. The prince's perplexed expression remained unchanged as Lily added that, while it was difficult to admit, it would be dishonorable for her to marry a cucumber while thinking of a sweet potato. For this reason, she was convinced the annulment was the best course of action. However, rather than making the prince back down, her words only enraged him further, as he declared that he wouldn't back down from his promise so easily. The man simply couldn't accept the fact that his fiancée had fallen for another man, especially considering how she had once coveted the title of crown princess above all else. Once, she had even pretended that her affection for him was genuine. But now Adamir could see the wolf hiding behind the sheep's wool, the deceptive female standing right before him. Lily tried to say something to the young man, but he was lost in his dark thoughts, certain that her abrupt change in behavior was far too suspicious. With that, he concluded there was a hidden agenda and reiterated that he wouldn't break off the engagement out of spite. According to him, Elodie was throwing a tantrum to get his attention, and he would only agree to the annulment if they discussed the matter properly at a later time, not in the speed run of her erratic mind. Speaking of erratic, as she listened to his words, the girl was mentally dancing in circles, her complexion growing even paler than a Norwegian vampire. Putting that topic aside, Adamir suggested they discuss the preparations for his father's birthday banquet online through Google Meet, with the camera turned off, as he didn't want to look at the face of this ungrateful woman. In the midst of this conversation, the girl was already more gone than present. Although the prince thought she was faking weakness to elicit sympathy, the poor thing collapsed to the floor right there. Still, the man assumed it was all a ruse, and he almost kicked her to prove his point. But she wasn't responding to any of his calls. Getting closer and insisting on calling her name, he finally realized she was truly out of it, so he lifted her in his arms and shouted for help. Yet all he heard was the sound of silence, ignoring his panic calls, forcing him to lay her back down on the floor. Although Elodie was just the Duke's illegitimate daughter, it was cruel that no maid was there to offer assistance in such a dire moment. Even a man as selfish as Adamir could recognize that. Soon, with the Duke's daughter in his arms, Adamir set out in search of a guest room where he could lay her down, only to run into Martha, the maid who had always been by Elodie's side. With the servant's help, the prince finally carried his ex-future fiancée to a bed, and Martha casually remarked that this wasn't the first time the girl had blue-screened like this. Adamir was outraged to hear the maid speak so nonchalantly about her mistress's condition. At the same time, he examined Elodie and noticed a cut on one of her wrists. Reflecting on the grim reality, Elodie was confined to a guest bed with barely any servants to care for her, where her only companion was a psycho maid who seemed like one of those movie servants who kept their masters sick for sheer pleasure. Lastly, there was this cut on her wrist, which didn't seem like a good sign, though Adamir believed Elodie wasn't in mortal danger. Since earlier, during their conversation, the girl had been sweating, but Adamir had assumed she was just nervous in the presence of his imposing, gallant self. Now that he realized the girl had truly been in bad shape, the prince felt ashamed for having downplayed the condition of the one who should have been his future wife. Speaking of which, this event made him recognize that he hardly knew his betrothed, despite his arrogance making him believe everything he did was enough. Sometime later, Elodie awoke with a pounding headache, convinced that she had crashed due to the toxins left in her body from preparing the antidote. After all, when her blessing had manifested, Ellery discovered there were certain conditions for the effects of her power to be triggered. First of all, she had to ingest the poison and then apply her blessing to any ordinary water, creating a counteragent. Additionally, Lily had learned that if she was pressed for time, she could use her own blood instead. Actually, she had only intended to open a small cut to collect the blood, but her hand had slipped. Speaking of which, she didn't remember changing the bandages on her wrist, so she figured the doctor must have come while she was passed out, but then she recalled that the jerk had refused to treat children born out of wedlock, the moralistic scumbag. At that moment, Martha arrived with a teapot of hot water. Quite simply the worst thing on the face of the earth. If this maid wasn't trying to kill her mistress, I don't know what is. Additionally, she had brought powdered medicine instead of pills, just to add that delightful touch to the boiling water. As she took her medication, Elodie asked where Adamir had gone, and Martha replied that the crown prince had left as soon as the doctor had arrived. Not that Lily cared much, but she figured it must have looked bad to collapse right in front of her fiancé. By the way, the maid handed her a letter that the handsome prince had left for her to read upon waking, in which Adamir expressed his desire to have her company at his father's birthday banquet. Upon reading that, the sparkle in Lily's eyes quickly faded. Not even in her wettest nightmares had she imagined that, after requesting the annulment of their marriage, her fiancé would invite her to a bloody ball. To top it all off, she hadn't even thought about a dress for the occasion, since her plan had been to dump that clingy Adamir. However, Martha took charge, confidently stating that everything was under control, though her mistress didn't seem too pleased, as the banquet was the least of her worries. Elodie simply couldn't understand why the stubborn prince wouldn't accept being dumped, so Martha speculated that perhaps the man had finally fallen for her. With her self-esteem still intact, Elodie sternly told her maid never to say something so absurd in her presence again, as there was no way the crown prince could be interested in a bastard who was more trouble than a used washing machine. Regardless of whether there was an answer to that question or not, Elodie remained motivated to take things slow. After all, she still had 3 years before the Duke adopted Estelle. By then, Elodie would have made enough money and could flaunt her independence without risking death. Or at least, that's what she thought. A few days later, in the mansion's lobby, Elodie stumbled upon yet another challenge in her hectic life. Though she didn't recognize the young man at first, she stared into his face and recalled a passage from the novel where a character had the same exact features as the guy. A thick neck and a head shaped like a croquette. He was Hector Arnold, the trusted advisor of Duke Perdia. In other words, the Duke's well-trained lapdog. However, this man would be the one responsible for stabbing Sylvester in the back without being caught. So perhaps this dog was more of a cat. But the worst part was that he would also play a crucial role in revealing the secrets of Elodie's lineage. Returning to the schizophrenic narrative of how to find love as the unwanted adoptive daughter of an evil family, our heroine, Elodie, tries to poison poor Estelle, but her Cebulinia-level deadly plan goes down the drain when the genius drinks from the cup she herself poisoned, leaving the Sarah wine without poison for the girl she intended to send straight to hell. Fortunately, her newly awakened blessing acted as a stomach wash, so thorough that it saved Elodie's life and prevented her death, but it only swapped one tragic end for another. After all, her true identity was revealed as the legitimate daughter of Duke Perdia, and after this wacky racist-style criminal odyssey, Elodie finds herself humiliatingly humiliated by humiliating humiliations in this house of crazy people. However, even though you might have thought Elodie herself swapped the cup by mistake, I'd like you to apologize to our favorite protagonist now, because one of the most suspicious suspects of the narrative is right before our innocent eyes. Hector Harold, with his cynical and falsely helpful expression, asks Elodie if she needs any help. The hard truth is that this human coxswain betrayed House Perdia to favor the second prince, because Duke Perdia supported the crown prince. According to Elodie, Hector decided to swap the poison to break the alliance between the crown prince and House Perdia, but a more urgent question occupies her mind as she reflects on this. How long has Hector been the second prince's errand boy? There are still 3 years until his betrayal is fully revealed, and the damsel wonders if there's any trace of honesty in this disgusting man's words. Observing the coxswain's face closely, Elodie could see the true wolf in sheep's clothing before her, a hyena's grin behind this wagging puppy, a dry and overbaked cheese and ham roll from the bus station hidden behind this allegedly caterpillar-filled fried coxswain. Nevertheless, Elodie is humble and doesn't possess Metaferando's abilities, so she assumes it's impossible to read someone's heart. Be that as it may, so far, she hasn't given the bastard any reason to kill her in this life, so there's no need to distrust him at the moment. Besides, Elodie has no plans to Vascar Estelle, so she tries to keep her routine on the down low without drawing too much attention. So, she casually replies to the man, saying she's just taking an innocent stroll with no intent to brutally murder anyone through poison. After all, even though she's grounded, no one said she should stay only in her little princess room, especially since she lost her way back there ages ago and has been wandering aimlessly between the kitchen and the bathroom on the 36th floor for 3 weeks now. For his part, Hector agrees that the young lady's father wouldn't limit her to her little room, so he sees no problem with her endless wandering. Inside, all Elodie can think is that she will have left this snake's nest long before Hector Harold starts carrying out his schemes, and whether the guy is already a traitor or not, she doesn't care. Still, How could Elodie sleep soundly knowing that such a methodical and backstabbing fellow roams the vast halls of this mansion? With that in mind, the girl forgets she's in the middle of a conversation and assumes a reflective posture, lost inside her limited little head, making the man before her believe the rumors that Lady Elodie Purdia is absolutely out of her mind. Thinking to herself, she figures it would be a good idea to test this fool with a small trap. So she pretends to trust the man and confesses she's worried her father is furious with her and asks for advice on how to go back to being daddy's little girl. Hector asks what she could have done to piss His Excellency off, and she explains she requested the annulment of her engagement because she's madly in love with the second prince's naked body. Caught off guard, Hector starts sweating, as the Duke's daughter just confessed her love for her father's political enemy. With this strategy, Elodie hopes to find out if Hector is already connected to the second prince, because if he is, the prince will soon hear this juicy gossip. In culinary terms, this is the enemy's chance to savor a delicious intrigue using the noble girl's flesh, though Elodie has poison running through her veins. After making this false confession, she begs the guy not to snitch on her, and he promises his lips are sealed forever. As for the advice on not making her father even angrier, he suggests the girl stop leaving streaked panties in the bathroom and refrain from doing anything else that might make the old man want to rip her a new one with his bare hands. With that, Elodie thanks him for the wise counsel, while inwardly hoping the fish has bitten the bait. Shortly after, still keeping with the fish metaphor, Elodie discovers that the time to reel in that fish came much sooner than she could have imagined. One day, with the help of her loyal Martha, Elodie dresses up like a true princess and asks her maid if the result was satisfactory. Without hesitation, Martha cries, saying her mistress will be the most beautiful lady at the ball. Even though she's grounded, Elodie is obliged to attend House Purdia's official events as a family member, so she's getting ready for today's birthday banquet in honor of the emperor. Flaunting her envy-inducing outfit, the lady heads to the carriage that will take her to the awaited event. And while waiting for her escort there, standing in front of the carriage, was the bitter and resentful Ademir, the first prince of the Wallachia Empire, whom glorious Elodie had ditched. Activating falchion mode, the girl says it's an honor to accompany His Highness on this trip, but the man can't shake his grumpy face, even though he tries to maintain a minimum of dignity. For a moment, Elodie thinks Ademir is waiting for an apology for her fainting in front of him, but she lets it slide for now. The prince offers his hand to help his future ex-fiancée into the vehicle, and despite everything, the girl finds it a very kind gesture from the young man and responds by offering her hand. Being honest with herself, she hopes this banquet will be smooth as a cricket, so it doesn't turn into a mess for her later. The plan is to go with the flow and let it ride. Upon arrival, the nobility was doing what they do best at the palace, being noble for no reason. Suddenly, the bombastic duo that no one knows whether to call a couple arrives. Without even letting out a little fart in the mansion, the first thing Ademir says to the woman is that he needs to step away for a courtesy meeting, then wonders why the girl dumped him. Not that Elodie would complain about this opportunity to be alone, as it will allow her to put her plan into action. Wasting no time, she disappears from the ballroom and meets with a mysterious man who will leave us flabbergasted when his identity is revealed. By this point, Elodie already knew that Coxinyaman, or rather, Hector Harold, was secretly serving the second prince. That is, if her suspicions are correct, Harold has been playing both sides long before the romance story began, because the secret she shared with Hector is intimately linked to this man who approaches Lady Elodie with all his charm and allure. Nearby, in the so-called meeting, a mustached subordinate was trying to communicate with His Highness Ademir about the boring matters they needed to resolve, but the prince's attention was focused elsewhere. The mustache man thinks he said something wrong, but the truth is that Ademir's hornache was at its peak after witnessing the odd exchange between a certain someone and his woman, or rather, future ex-wife. To his surprise, Elodie was chatting it up with a guy named Beltran, wearing the loosest smile this side of expired twine. Who would have thought that after all that drama where the young lady displayed feelings for another man besides Ademir, the scoundrel this brat has been madly in love with is that very bastard? In Ademir's humble opinion, Elodie must be crazy if she fell for Beltran. Leaving the man with a vast mustache talking to himself, the prince heads toward that shamelessness to get some answers. Then, we discover that Beltran is indeed the second prince, a womanizing dog, known for being desired by every skirt wearer aged 18 to 74 of all possible genders in a fantasy world. His reputation as a playboy solidified when the guy couldn't go a weekend without stomping into the pleasure district, a slum with more brothels per square meter than evangelical churches in the outskirts. I don't see anything wrong with that, but according to Elodie, that makes him a scoundrel. And who am I to contest Lady Perdia's decree, right? Knowing this, Adamir can't bear the thought of his foolish brother whispering lies into his woman's ear to make her abandon her one true love. In his mind, it's the duty of a gentleman to prevent his intended from being manipulated by such a cynical and villainous fellow, so our hero rushes in for a heroic act worthy of his noble title. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ring, Beltran throws his lasso in Lady Elodie's direction, commenting that the very flesh and blood Ishtar blessed the two of them tonight, as there would be no better moment to meet such a beautiful and elegant young lady. On the outside, Elodie smiles and thanks him. Inside, she just wants to die. Then, the prankster invites the lady to an opera, to a fancy restaurant, to take a ride on his yacht, to Dubai, to the submarine that goes down to the Titanic, to eat a hot dog with quail egg and mashed potatoes from Uncle Kleisen, to play truth or dare, to spin a Beyblade upside down, and to dance the dance of 1, 2, 3 for kicking the butt, hand on the crotch. For 3, 2, 1, this isn't for everyone. While accepting each invitation with a smile on her face, Elodie reflects that the fact the second prince wants to crush her rat means Hector spilled the beans. Since her intention was only to find out if her father's assistant was the mole, now she just needs to get the hell out of there. But the problem is that this darn Beltran won't let go of her. As if that wasn't enough, the knucklehead was plotting in his mind how his brother and Duke Perdia would react when they found out that Adamir's fiancée was hitting on him right under their noses. Because he left the girl alone at the ball, Beltran thinks his brother is a real idiot, unlike himself, who would never leave a lonely and beautiful flower like this one abandoned at such a sweet party. As Correo once said, "You left her aside to talk with your friends about your boring stuff. She gave me an opening, so I got closer because I thrive on your failure." She was standing there alone, wanting attention, and someone to talk to you left her aside. You'll pay for your mistake, you better believe it, so it's over. I'll do it in a way she won't forget. Finally, Beltran invites the lady for a dance in the ballroom. But someone arrives just in time to put an end to this nonsense. And no, it wasn't Adamir. It was someone far more imposing and threatening. Elodie's father, Duke Perdia. He says he has matters to discuss with his daughter, so he blows the whistle for her to come. Without thinking twice, Elodie grabs the chance to free herself from this unwanted prince and heads toward Daddy. For his part, the Duke grabs the poor girl by the arm and drags her away. For a moment, the girl thought it might be a dream, but after pinching her cheek and realizing it hurt, she discovered reality was more real than ever. The man drags the damsel out onto a balcony. Nervous to the core, all Elodie wanted was for her father not to be a typical cold and calculating type who takes 100,000 years to reveal his true intentions. Dying from the man's silence, she asks what he wants. Then he makes it clear that it would be nice if his daughter kept her distance from the second prince. For her part, that wouldn't be any trouble for the girl, which she's quick to point out to Daddy, since she was only politely responding to the playboy pervert's remarks. The Duke thinks that's great and adds that Beltran's reputation as a womanizer and player isn't a secret to anyone. So it's best for Elodie to stay far away from this guy in any social occasion like this and ignore any Instagram DMs if they come from him. Faced with this, Elodie is stunned and asks if, by any chance, her father is worried about her. Since the man only responds with silence, the girl interprets the lack of words as proof that he only cares about appearances in front of the rest of the royalty. However, the Duke opens up and confesses that maybe he is. Not believing her ears, Elodie asks, "Maybe what, damn it? Worried about you." The man reaffirms. "About me?" Elodie wants to know. "Are you deaf? You daughter of a prostitute?" The man replies with a question. So, Elodie observes the face of her supposed father and is sure that delicious face is of a worried dad. Though the truth is he isn't even her dad. Imagine what will happen when he finds out. It'll be a disaster for Elodie's life. Setting that aside, the girl asks to confide something in the man, who shows himself willing to hear what Lily has to say. So, as much as she understands this might be seen as her own erotic fanfic or just another of her schizophrenic episodes, she assures him it would be a good idea for Duke Perdia to stay well away from Hector Arold, his assistant. In her mind, any action taken to benefit House Perdia is like an insurance policy for herself in the future, so she's just securing her spot in this house. If the Duke fries the traitors in his service, it will certainly benefit Elodie, but it's not just a political gain she seeks. In a way, she feels that helping this man is a way to thank him for raising her. Meanwhile, inside, some maidens were fanning their faces, as the heat was intense in front of the two most handsome men at the party, Yancey and Carl, Elodie's brothers. Carl comments that their sister is more lost at this party than a blind man in a shootout if she thinks she can flirt with the second prince in front of everyone. But the elder brother believes it was Beltran who hit on the woman, not the other way around. Still, Carl is convinced that their sister is missing a screw and argues that Lily shouldn't be left loose at these high society events, as she clearly needs a doctor to check that deficient noggin. This speech makes Yancey lose his cool and melt part of the glass he was holding as he accidentally activates his blessing. According to him, it's stress. Because of that, he suggests the redhead keeps his complaints to himself before things get really heated. After all, it would be a shame if Yancey erased something else from existence. Returning to the ballroom, Elodie felt light after being saved by the Duke, something she definitely didn't expect to happen. Now that her work there was done, she decides to hit the road and return to the mansion. However, of course, some random guy was going to get in her way. I think you already imagined that, didn't you? Well, Adamir Hornhead approaches Elodie, but surprisingly, it wasn't to demand explanations about her brief conversation with his gallant brother. Quite the opposite. The first prince wants a dance with his fiancée. Right away, Elodie realizes she had completely forgotten about this guy, so she plays the tired card and says she needs to hit the sack as soon as she gets home. Inside, she reflects on how these people are acting very differently from usual, especially since Adamir isn't worried about the earlier mess with his brother. There's got to be something fishy going on. Then, when she confirms her desire to head home, Adamir asks for her hand to discuss a little something with her. Elodie is already fed up with dealing with out-of-it princes at every step she takes in these Barbie princess ballrooms. So the guy asks for an explanation for the face of disgust the lady didn't bother to hide from him. Elodie pretends the guy's making things up and offers her hand to him, and he decides to let it slide. In the middle of the dance floor, where the nobles were dancing their dances, Adamir brings up the engagement cancellation topic again. Once again, the confused man asks if she made the request to call it quits, and she reaffirms for the 1,000th time that yes, she threw in the towel and all that jazz. Faced with this question, the girl even imagines he's changed his mind and will accept this annulment nonsense. But that's when he made it clear he's going to refuse. With a clear intention to smack this spoiled, annoying brat, Lily asks why. Then Adamir explains that this engagement is proving very useful to him. Hearing this, the young lady loses her temper and enters a state of physical division between the depression over the Herculean effort this wretch makes to be unbearable, and her overwhelming and uncontrollable urge to execute this jerk coldly with any sharp utensil on a nearby table. Since she can't kill the prince, the lady stomps on his foot with force and plays dumb, saying it was just a movement miscalculation that caused this epic moment. In the most cynical way possible, she asks if it hurts, and Adamir, pulling his strings of anger, pretends he didn't feel a thing because he was forged in the fires of war like Lucas Pavinato from MBL. 2 days after that nonsense, Elodie couldn't believe time had passed so quickly since the banquet. But it would have been great if she had skipped a week between panels, because until now her constipation hasn't resolved the 3 kilos of chicken medallion she stuffed down her throat at the party. Moreover, she's still brooding over the audacity of that pregnant cow's son who referred to her as if she were some kind of object to be used for his own ends. At least, she had a small revenge by repeating the foot stomp on the guy a few times, but Elodie feels it wasn't enough because Adamir made it clear through and through that he doesn't accept the engagement annulment, so this nonsense is still going to be a major headache for our protagonist. In Lily's mind, the breakup would benefit both parties, but considering the prince is throwing a fit, she can wait for him to fall for Estelle, no problem. Setting that aside, appearing like a ghost in her mistress's quarters, the disheveled Martha shows up all worked up. She asks if Elodie did it again, but the young lady has no idea what the woman is talking about, or at least pretends not to. That's what Martha thinks, as she sees Elodie sweating buckets and shaking like a jackhammer as she responds to this question. The maid asserts with all her words that Elodie knows exactly what she got herself into, because if nothing had happened, surely the Duchess herself wouldn't want to see her in her garden. Elodie recalls that her first experience with Demis wasn't the most pleasant, as she was a sick child crying her eyes out from a fever or something like that, and there was no one around to take care of the poor thing except the dreaded Duchess. On that occasion, the woman sat at the edge of the bed, silently watching Elodie cry pitifully. Only the popcorn was missing from her hands. Her gaze was disinterested and devoid of any emotion, much like how the screenwriter felt working a 6-by-1 shift. In a way, just like those around the screenwriter saw him, Demi saw no life in Elodie. To this day, that memory haunts Lily and the writer, although Elodie recently closed a sensational business deal with this frightening woman. Arriving at the poison specialist greenhouse, Elodie couldn't see her anywhere in the room, so she decides to kill time snooping around until she comes back or appears from the bush where she's hiding. Glancing from here to there, the girl spots a beautiful flower she'd love to know the name of. Enchanted by that natural beauty, the lady reaches out toward the plant, when Demis warns that 1 centimeter closer and that little flower will give the girl a leg lock. Elodie jumps in fright at the at least questionable arrival of that spooky figure. Then Demis explains that this is a carnivorous plant called Halcaria, a rare species that feeds on human prey. It lures its unsuspecting victims with its impressive features and intoxicating pollen, only to devour the poor souls down to the bones. For that reason, the Duchess asks the young lady to be a little more careful where she sticks that finger. Elodie is shocked that such a delicate flower could devour a person, and Demis already expected the surprise. After all, this crazy plant was recently discovered on the uninhabited island off the coast of the Kingdom of Dve. With that, Demis invites the young lady to sit and serves her a refreshing cup of Fanta orange tea. Genuinely happy, Elodie had really been craving something cool after the near-death scare that nearly sent her soul out of her body, almost to be devoured by some sinister plant that surely devours souls in this crazy woman's greenhouse. So, without hesitation, Elodie chugs the whole cup down. Then Demis asks if that's really what she saw. The girl gets confused, thinking she's being rude once again in front of others, like when she went to her ex's house and chugged an entire bottle of Coke before lunch was even served at the table with his whole family present. However, the truth is Demis didn't expect Elodie to drink at all, because the people she calls there wouldn't drink what she offers them, even if threatened. Of course, Elodie attributes this suspicion to the fact that the woman is a professional poisoner, but since the girl knows she won't die for another 3 years, down the hatch. What doesn't kill you fattens you up. Bring on another round of poison for the little princess here. The problem, obviously, is acting as if she's immortal everywhere in this mansion, because people are starting to notice this girl isn't quite right. That's why she decides to come up with some random excuse to seem normal, like saying she was as thirsty as 9 camels in the Sahara, not to mention the delicious fragrance of the tea. Demis replies there's no smell in this tea, except for the sourness from being left open for 3 months outside the fridge. So Elodie breaks a sweat and tries to think of something better to say. That's when she found the perfect exit. Of course, the path would be to make it clear that the trust in her business partner made her drink the tea without a second thought. Seizing this topic to steer the conversation away from the mess, Elodie asks if her antidote is already rocking the market and comments that surely her business partner would never poison her. For her part, Demis agrees with the young lady and points out that she's smarter than she seems because so far, she appeared to be a donkey with cerebral palsy. However, Demis assumes a sinister expression and questions how that would be a good reason to assume Elodie is safe from her poison. However, then she stops fooling around and confesses she didn't poison the tea at all, she just wanted to mess with the girl's life for no reason. Still, Demis thinks Elodie could adopt a more cautious posture, though she's happy that she's the first guest to try one of her Fanta orange teas with a Fijota seasoning. If she wanted to hire Elodie for Vasco, Demis wouldn't have been so brazen as to tamper with the tea while the two were sitting face to face. If she were that reckless, she surely wouldn't have gotten very far in this business. Moreover, Demis states that she could find much more creative, sordid, macabre, psychotic, and cruel ways to kill someone. At that, Elodie lets out a delicate fart. Then, Demis shares that the antidote sale license was approved, and the entire initial stock is already on the market in exchange for an advance payment. Though it's little since it's just starting, Demis tells Elodie that her share of the cash is already in the bag, so she sends a maid to bring a mini chest with little wheels. Inside the chest, the shiny gold was deliciously gleaming. Afterward, Demis asks how long it would take Elodie to produce another batch of antidote, and whether she would accept an offer for the recipe. However, Elodie sees the recipe as a trade secret. In other words, she doesn't want any son of a witch messing with her golden goose. Accepting that with no fuss, the Duchess mentions that she has a selection of deadly toxins that also need counteragents and asks if the young lady can produce them for these as well. Elodie replies yes, but the stronger the poison, the longer it takes to create an antidote. Being honest with herself, Elodie would rather not have to deal with such heavy substances because finding a solution for them would be an extremely painful process. After all, to purify this stuff, she first has to drink it with lime and sugar in a cocktail she's dubbed Caponino, the Caparino of poison. The most complicated part is that, even with her blessing, the poor girl still suffers the excruciating effects of the substance. Returning to the conversation, The supposed daughter of the Duke once again asks that the deal between them remain a secret because she doesn't want her name being passed around. Then, boy, Demis gets mad and questions why this girl sees her as a snake, a two-faced traitor ready to break her promise. Knowing better than to poke this hornet's nest with a short stick, Elodie begs for mercy and tries to justify that it's not quite like that, while the Duchess assures her she won't blab and everything is in order. After all, aren't they business partners? Well, they are, right? They're business partners. That's what Elodie thinks too. Partners, BFFs, through thick and thin, to infinity and beyond. However, just hearing the word we, the girl already feels weird because being a Purdia only in name, without actually belonging to the royal family's bloodline, Elodie feels out of place. Later, after this meeting, the most poisoned protagonist in manga history wanders through the endless halls in search of the nearest bathroom in the mansion, as it's been 3 weeks since she's found one. And the fart she let out in front of the terrifying Demis Purdia is a concrete sign that the toilet will become a throne and Elodie will be crowned as soon as she finds one. However, in the midst of her journey, she hears a voice ordering someone to be thrown into the cells. Outside, Duke Purdia and his soldiers had their hands around Hector Harold's neck in the backyard. Tied up, Hector swears he's done nothing but serve the Purdia family with his utmost loyalty. But the Duke responds that there is concrete proof of his assistant's betrayal, that he's been secretly working for the second prince. Hector argues that it's a lie from Beltran, that this fake prince is just trying to sow discord among his political rivals. Amused by the scene, Elodie puts on her 3D glasses and grabs some popcorn to watch the show. So, even as the man swore his innocence, the Duke brings his blade closer to the criminal's face, causing his terror and uncontrolled sobbing from the inevitable feeling that his life is about to end. Then, Hector begs to be spared and for mercy from the Duke. At that point, Elodie loses some of the fun, realizing that things are about to get messy. And even though she knows that Guy is a worm, she has no interest in seeing that Coccinya's head rolling toward her. In a way, Elodie interprets this scene as a dark omen for her own future, so she turns to leave the show and get out of there as fast as possible. However, of course, the Duke calls out her name at the crucial moment. Who would have thought, right? With her but clenched, the girl asks what her lovely daddy wants, and the Duke questions why she's so shocked, suggesting that someone might suspect she's guilty of something. At that moment, it wasn't sweat trickling down the girl's face. Someone had dumped a bucket of water over her head. There's no other explanation. Without thinking clearly, she replies that she hasn't done anything wrong. At least, not yet. The Duke asks what kind of twisted talk is that about not yet. So the girl gets even more nervous and swears by her dead mother behind the door that she will never do anything illegal in this godforsaken place. With that, Duke Purdia tells her to calm down and calls his daughter closer. Shaking with fear, Elodie obeys and follows her father. She thought he was going to drag her to his office to give her a spanking, but it was the Duke's room for some reason, and this reason completely escaped our brave damsel's understanding. Soon, the Duke takes off his coat and asks the girl to sit. Out of love for her life, Elodie doesn't refuse the invitation, so Purdia asks how she knew about Hector Harold's betrayal. The daughter tells the story from the beginning when she supposedly ran into the man by chance in the mansion's corridor before the Emperor's birthday banquet. This is a half-truth, but Elodie feels safe sticking to this version for now, as she doesn't want her pretend father to know everything. So, she tells him that his assistant mixed things up in a conversation with her and mistakenly interpreted that Lady Elodie was madly in love with the most desired man in the universe, the second Prince Beltran, also known as Gap Splitter. Upon hearing that name, Purdia loses his cool and turns into a psycho demon about to commit a crime he would never need to regret, as not only is he powerful enough to get away with it, but he doesn't have feelings to begin with. Elodie keeps the lie going and insists that the guy got everything wrong, that he's got crap in his brain for thinking such an absurd thing, and that she would never have any kind of attraction to that tuxedo-wearing cockroach known as the Second Prince. However, since she couldn't correct Hector's misunderstanding about this matter, that's why Beltran approached her at the banquet, wanting Elodie as his dessert. Thinking something was fishy with this story, the innocent damsel figured it was best to warn her father. By this point, the guy was already smashing wood, concrete, ceramic, everything in sight was being crushed under his hands. Suddenly, he calms down out of nowhere to return to his cold and calculating demeanor and accepts the explanation just fine. Then he says he's going to exterminate all these damned traitorous insects crawling with their disgusting little legs in his clean and fragrant residence. So he orders Elodie not to leave the annex until the situation is resolved. Even though she leads a double life, what could Elodie do but agree? Thus, the Duke confesses that he's not too proud to recognize his daughter as a key player in exposing the snitch. So he's willing to grant her a reward, though there's a limit of 20 reis because her father spent all his money this month on a sick chandelier for the 36th floor living room. For her part, Elodie wasn't interested in material goods. In her heart, she deeply wished Duke Perdia would promise not to kill her under any circumstances, but since she can't just blurt that out, she's satisfied to ask for her freedom back. Perdia questions if that's all she can think of, and she takes the opportunity to confirm, making an innocent puppy face. Thus, the nobleman allows his daughter to return to her double life, as usual. Inside, the girl was all joy, jumping up and down, but the man warns there's a condition, so the girl immediately loses most of the excitement, bracing for what's to come. The Duke imagines that his daughter must be climbing the walls, eager to leave the house after being cooped up in the mansion for so long as punishment. And the young lady makes sure to emphasize it, considering that her freedom is about to sing and the chat gang is already, how should I say it, firing shots into the air, of course. Come with me, folks, because now you'll learn the real meaning of madness. The thing is this. The nobleman mentions that a certain companion of Elodie must also be itching to enjoy life outside the mansion's boundaries, as that is what he will be doing when the Duke assigns him as Elodie's watchman, like a true guard dog. And just like some of us had the chance to choose our first dog in childhood, the lady can choose to have one of her brothers on her tail, either Yancey or Carlinhos. After all, Beltran could show up again and pester Elodie whenever he pleases. So the Duke needs a member of royalty with the authority to stop the second prince if he ever thinks about laying his filthy hands on the young lady. Elodie, for her part, comments that she's unsure which of the two she would prefer, so her father offers both at once. Naturally, she dismisses this insane idea without hesitation and says she has made her choice. Before she declares her option, I'd like to assume that she'll pick the older brother, the tall, dark-haired one, because even though he's a disgusting, violent sociopath, at the very least, he has some sympathy for his sister, unlike Carlinhos, who's just a pain in the neck with the same name as the third striker of Flamengo. And then, the big reveal is made before our eyes. And no, I didn't know she'd pick Carlinhos before writing that last part of the script. I was just as surprised. Apparently, the kid was also caught off guard when Elodie informed him he would be her bodyguard, so he joins us in surprise with the same energy. Carlinhos asks if his dad is trying to pull a prank on him like one of those classic Silvio Santos pranks on SBT. Oh dear, press F twice. However, as Elodie rightly points out, the Duke of Perdia has the same sense of humor as a grocery store cashier at the end of a long shift, so this is no joke. Still, Carlinhos boldly declares that he would rather die than lower himself to such an embarrassing role, at which point Elodie gives him that "you're already in deep trouble, kid look," and says she'll tell dad everything. In a panic, Carlinhos grabs his sister and changes his tune, of course. He begs her not to tattle on him for whining like a spoiled brat to their father. And so, from then on, Elodie strolls through the kingdom's clean, fragrant streets with her new companion, though he finds it a complete waste of time. Elodie, however, reflects that she made the right choice. Although Carlinhos is an annoying brat, Yancey has a more enigmatic personality that she doesn't want to deal with. Carl asks where her personal maid is, and she replies that Martha is busy with other, more specific tasks she was ordered to complete. Other than that, Elodie doesn't think she needs anyone else, having such a strong and virile man by her side for whatever might come their way. Carl asks what she means by that, and Elodie tells him not to read too much into everything she says. Personally, I think this young lady has already transcended double meanings and is far ahead of her time, probably in a triple or quadruple meanings. In her mind, she reflects that Carlet isn't as intense as Yancey, but he still carries a destructive blessing as a descendant of the House of Perdia. His talent allows him to destroy the earth as he pleases, causing anything from small holes in the ground to massive rifts across entire territories. Obviously, this ability is more suited to war, so Carlinhos doesn't shine much during peacetime. Even so, he has always taken great pride in his blessing, as well as his extraordinary talent with swords. Thus, after this lengthy reflection from our protagonist, Carlet admits that his little sister couldn't have asked for a better security detail, while she grows more and more convinced that the poor guy is as dumb as a brick. Eventually, Elodie mentions that she wants to browse the seamstress boutiques on this street. Carl asks why she didn't just summon the seamstresses to the mansion instead of popping into their shop like some peasant, but Elodie has her reasons. Those reasons involve the lank au blanc, as the lady is dying to try their chocolate fondant. But to make that happen, she would absolutely love for her dear little brother to go fetch her some of that delicious treat. Carlet asks if she brought him all the way here just to buy a cake, but Elodie couldn't care less about his whining and tells him to get moving. However, Carlinhos isn't stupid and knows he's heard rumors of something called a line, a terrible phenomenon poor people endure in stores when a bunch of them crowd together and have to wait their turn to get what they want. No nobleman like him should ever have to endure such humiliation. Lady Perdita, have mercy on our boy. Elodie, wearing her smug smile, reminds him that no one is holding a gun to his head, and she'd hate to think she's pressuring her brother into anything. But aside from that, she also can't imagine the nightmare Carlet's life will become if their father finds out he's been disobeying orders. Or rather, she can imagine it. Duke Perdita blowing up on Carlinhos and unleashing his justice upon the poor boy. Let's not forget that this is the man who destroyed a chair just because Elodie misspoke during a conversation. Obviously, Elodie figures that it won't be a chair that gets destroyed this time in the face of Carlet's insolence. It will be his rear end. But of course, after terrorizing her little brother, Elodie reassures him that she would never rat him out to their father. She promises she'll speak very highly of him to Daddy, though she doubts her word carries much weight with the Duke of Perdita. Well, given how annoying this whole cake situation has become, Carlinhos finally asks if she wants the damn cake or not. She responds, it's chocolate fondant, not cake. Deep down, Elodie concludes that this is easier than taking candy from a baby. What a crafty young lady, too clever for her own good. Inside the shop, Carlinhos is faced with a selection of desserts, including 3 coconut sweets standing upright, utterly astonished at who they're seeing in this out-of-the-way place. After 2 hours of waiting in line and practically going into shock like someone at Americana's during a major sale, the nobleman finally places his order under the scornful gaze of those young women who could never have imagined they would see the second rebellious son of Duke Perdita in person, like a lemon tart on display. Listening to every murmur from those loose lips, the young man felt humiliated and objectified, like a strawberry shortcake, but he kept his head high and pushed through with his request for a chocolate fondant. Upon hearing his order, the busybodies commented on how it was probably the first time he'd been in a shop as an ordinary person. And now they knew what to offer him, slathered with honey, at the next banquet. Pushed to the brink, Carlinhos tells the cashier to pack up the entire stock and send it to the Perdita mansion, and he'll take one of the boxes with him. After all that nonsense, the guy storms into the boutique next door, fuming with anger, shouting for his sister in an aggressive manner. The shopkeeper braces herself to snap back at the rude customer, but when she sees that it's the Duke's son, she quickly changes her tone, warmly welcoming the spoiled brat, who only wants to know where his sister is. The woman tells him that Lady Elodie said she had a task to take care of and had already left some time ago. Carlinhos asks how long ago she took off, only to discover that she ditched him 2 hours ago. And speaking of the lady herself, Elodie Perdita was frolicking happily in a beautiful flower field when her joy was cut short upon realizing she had forgotten her umbrella at the boutique. Not just any umbrella, either. It was one of her favorites among the other 476 she owned in her closet. Still, she couldn't return after ditching her brother, especially since Carlinhos had surely noticed her absence by now. However, considering the boy's intellect is on par with a clownfish, Elodie figures Carlet might be too proud to admit his failure, so it'll be a while before he kicks up a fuss. The real problem, of course, is that their father will find out sooner rather than later that the young lady has disappeared because, as we all know, the Duke of Perdita owns every inch of land she treads, and as we've seen before, the trees whisper among themselves. At least, that's what I learned from watching Suxa and the Elves with my girlfriend last Friday. To drown out the gossip around her, Elodie considers saying she went to a nearby tea house to rest. However, the truth is that she wasn't anywhere near a tea house, as her destination was the exotic Eastern Tower of Mages, and the young lady was eager since she had never set foot in a place like this before. It would be amazing to take a stroll and explore the place, she thinks, but unfortunately, time is short, and more important matters must be dealt with. With that in mind, she strides through the eccentric surroundings until she finds a seemingly young man, whom Elodie refers to as Good Sir. The young Good Sir asks how he can be of service, and the lady states that she is willing to invest some serious cash into a project at the tower. The Good Sir is startled by this statement and corrects his manner, now realizing how significant this person is for the financial health of the institution. I say this because, as we all know, investors are always treated well wherever they go, because as the old saying goes, money talks and people walk. With a flick of magic, the Good Sir summons a comfy chair for the lady to sit on and apologizes for his earlier poor reception of someone so important for the tower's financial health. But that's not all. The guy seems to have a bizarre obsession with money, and so he offers any tea the lady desires, while practically shouting his love for the capitalist system we live in. Elodie quickly realizes she's dealing with a circus, where this man is the clown, and so she tries to bring him back down to earth by saying she doesn't care about the tea. The good sir pitches the tower's investment opportunities, saying they're heavily involved in lucrative gold mining, but that's not what our heroine came for. Elodie had heard she could invest in an individual mage as a patron, and so she planned to sink all her money into a magician named Elvie. Disappointed by this choice, the good sir explains there are more profitable investments, but Elodie had already made up her mind. She wanted to invest 8,000 larets in this guy. Deep down, Elodie suspects the good sir probably thinks she's some kind of fool for pouring a small fortune into a mage who can barely light his thumb on fire, but the clerk couldn't possibly imagine the real reason behind Lady Perdia's decision. As we know, Elodie understands this romance from beginning to end, so she knows exactly what will happen. For example, she knows that one day Elvie will invent an arcane artifact that will make him filthy rich. In other words, she's investing in a game that's already won and will rake in a fortune effortlessly. In other words, she's banking on this investment like a boss. In other words, these people are letting Elodie dream, and we're dreaming along with her. Queen's at the top. Anyway, the good sir asks her to review the magical contract that must be signed. Elodie knows she can't use her real name to avoid future drama and leaving a trail for her pursuers when she flees the Perdia mansion, so she thinks of an alias. Unfortunately, the genius comes up with Lily, her usual nickname, as her first name, and then she quickly invents a last name and signs the document. The rest she leaves in God's hands. With that done, she hands the document back to the good sir, who reviews it and finally announces that Lily is now an official investor in the Eastern Tower of Mages. Before she leaves, he wishes her investment well. What is this young lady's name, you ask? According to the paperwork, she's Lady Lily Arkell. As she leaves the tower, Elodie concludes that her money is in good hands, so she doesn't need to worry about her finances anymore. The profits from the antidote sales alone would be enough. But the girl knows better than to get complacent in this cruel, capitalist world because the Duchess could spill the beans at any moment about her involvement in the antidote business. Not to mention any other federal-level drama the Duchess could stir up because one day, she'll be outright enemies with Duke Perdia. And if there's one thing that can solve big problems, my friends, that thing is money. Meanwhile, as the young lady contemplates the influence of capitalism on our lives, a disguised man finds the exact person he was looking for among the kingdom's streets. Elodie was considering going back to Carlinhos to smooth things over and avoid drawing too much attention to herself. But it seems trouble has always followed our protagonist wherever she goes. With a dazed expression, the mysterious man watches Elodie walk with his mouth half open before deciding to follow her steps quietly so as not to be noticed. Then, suddenly, Elodie's wrist is grabbed. The man in question declares, "There you are." But Elodie slips out of his grasp like butter and tells him that he's got the wrong person. She even thought it might have been her idiot brother, but it turns out this is a different kind of idiot. I mean, even though this guy had snuck up and grabbed her arm from behind, for some reason, Elodie didn't think he was the sleazy type you see everywhere. Quite the opposite, she took in that well-sculpted face and concluded that this guy was a real hottie, but it's impossible she knows him. Elodie would never forget such a sensational face. Either way, the fact is the guy messed up big time with that grab because now the poor girl's wrist is dislocated and she didn't invest a fortune in some random mage just to have to blow it all on physical therapy. However, the man insists that he's found exactly who he was looking for. Ji Yul Yun, the guy says. Confused, Elodie asks who this man is and how he knows that name. In the midst of this confusion, Carlinhos shows up, shouting his sister's name. And Elodie realizes this annoying little brat always manages to pop up at the worst possible moments. So she feels the need to wrap this situation up quickly before she's found out. Suddenly, the mysterious man leans in close to Lady Perdia and whispers that he'll come for her soon. Elodie turns around to ask what kind of nonsense he's talking about, but it's too late. The mysterious gentleman had already disappeared like a magician. With no clue what just happened, the young lady wonders who the heck that spooky guy was. Somehow, Elodie suspects she's been well and truly enchanted by the stranger, because, despite the briefness of their encounter, she feels as though an eternity had passed while she stood next to him. I mean, that lean-in was quite the game-changer for our young lady's psyche, we must admit. But now it was time for another man to grab Elodie by the arms. Yes, this young lady is like a badminton birdie in the hands of these guys. Every day, I support her decision to flee her house more and more. This time, it's Carlet, of course, who asks if his sister knows how dangerous it is to be wandering around these absolutely peaceful streets without any kind of guard. Come on, my friend, this kingdom seems weaker than Switzerland. I can't even imagine our young lady being approached by two guys on a motorcycle. Let's cut the nonsense. Anyway, Elodie asks if he actually cares about her safety, slaps his hand away, and tells him to stop being a fool. According to her, any trouble that happens won't be Carlet's fault. Ironically, it seems that the brat grew a conscience overnight. It's almost like this isn't even the same Manhwas, because if anyone wanted Elodie out of the house, it was definitely Carlet Perdita. Years ago, the maids of the mansion used to make extremely malicious comments about Lady Perdita, referring to her as an abomination, for example. In the same breath, they'd say she was as cold-hearted as her mother. And let's not forget the biggest topic of all. Despite not having a penny to her name, the maids couldn't stand the idea of this girl born out of wedlock claiming the Perdita name. After all, as everyone knows, Elodie had never awakened a Perdita blessing. Or rather, her blessing had nothing to do with the Perdita family's lineage, and it was her duty to hide it at all costs. On top of that, these women blamed the girl for the Duke's recent neglect of his duties, and they pitted the Duchess because Elodie wasn't her daughter. Listening in on their conversation, little Manhwas learned that his sister was born from the wrong womb and placed all the blame on her for his mom and dad throwing vases and dishes at each other so often. That's right. In the pea-brained mind of this child, it was all Elodie's fault that she had been birthed from the most hated woman in the world. With that idea stuck in his head, Manhwas began cruelly mistreating young Elodie. The first time he shoved her in his Renaissance Playboy attire, Elodie told him it wasn't cool and asked why he'd done it. The poor girl watched the maids nearby scoop up the little brat, while Manhwas, filled with bitterness, shouted, "You're a filthy child of sin." Not understanding the religious fundamentalist rhetoric, Elodie didn't get why he called her filthy and said that, thankfully, she scrubbed herself squeaky clean with soap every day, even her bum. However, the kid was furious and wouldn't back down, calling Herb impure of blood, making reference to the fact that their father had impregnated the wrong woman. He also screamed that all the chaos between their dad and mom was Elodie's fault. Because of that, he'd be thrilled if Elodie disappeared from this house. Or better yet, to be more honest, the brat made it clear he'd prefer if Elodie took a hike and never came back. Well, after remembering that traumatic event from her past, the one thing Elodie is crystal clear on is that this obnoxious kid doesn't want to see her again, even if she were painted gold. So she tells Manhwas not to worry about dad, if that's the issue, because she's not going to snitch on anyone to the Duke. With that, Carlet is left speechless, while Elodie laments that her dark past has returned to smack her in the face. But if there's one thing you and I both know, it's that we can't control when our traumas come back with a vengeance. They show up unannounced, ready to destroy our minds without remorse. And it's up to us to fight back with whatever weapons we've got, because sometimes, no one will be there to support us. That's been the case for Elodie Perdita ever since she was just a little girl. So small, so troubled. Oh God, someone console me because I'm about to cry. Despite all the nonsense, this girl has grown tough, and she's got other messes to handle besides this one. Like that black-haired, red-eyed weirdo. That mysterious figure knows something about Elodie's past life, and she definitely needs to figure out what it is. So she tells her brother it's time to get out of there. When she returns home and is greeted by Martha, the maid asks her mistress what's with the pile of gifts in her room. Elodie assumes they're sweets, and Martha asks if her lady plans to stuff her face with sugar until she explodes like a balloon, but Elodie insists she's not in the mood for jokes this afternoon. Thinking to herself, the young lady realizes she should have told Carlet that just one box of sweets would have been enough. After all, who would have thought a pampered lord who's never had a real-life experience wouldn't know how to act in public, right? But since the feast was laid out before her, Elodie decides to do some charity work and gives the sweets to Martha to share with her fellow maids. With that settled, Elodie turns her mind back to what's consuming her the most at the moment. That red-eyed guy. Without a doubt, he called her Ji-Yul Yun, her name in her previous life. So, that man must know some hot gossip Elodie never expected to find in this forgotten kingdom. But it's not just about rumors. This guy looked like a proper noble with his classy style and polished behavior, not to mention that face, which was as handsome as a holiday on a Monday. So, taking advantage of Martha still being around, Elodie asks if she knows any dashing gentleman in his 20s with black hair, red eyes, and lots of hotness, in case she hadn't mentioned that part. Martha asks if, besides being hot, he's also attractive because, there are people who are shrimp types, where you keep the body and toss the head. Elodie confirms that the guy is a reincarnation of Brad Pitt. But Martha has no idea who he is since she only knows ugly men in her miserable life as a maid. Elodie presses the question since Martha hadn't even taken a moment to think. But the maid reiterates that she has no clue. And so, the conversation ends, and Martha leaves. Alone, Elodie reflects that perhaps the guy isn't a noble after all, considering Martha doesn't know him. A maid of the Perdita family would surely be familiar with all the nobles in the region from the countless food, alcohol, and escort-filled parties that take place in the mansion. After all, that mysterious man had said he'd come for Elodie when the time was right, but she wasn't going to wait around for him. In other words, the hunt for ghosts has officially begun. Suddenly, the young lady spots a letter from the Imperial Palace sitting on her desk. She asks Martha where it came from, and the maid apologizes for forgetting that this correspondence had arrived earlier in the morning. Of all the things the woman forgets, this is definitely the worst. But Elodie isn't one to hold grudges for long and quickly asks the maid to fetch a pen and paper so she can reply to His Highness. Meanwhile, in a beautiful garden where roses are red and violets are blue, a servant of Yancey admits they were swindled at the Mage Tower. Yancey finds it odd that his sister is conducting business there in the first place. But what really bothers him is that this red-eyed man has no apparent connection to Lily, as far as they could tell. Yancey asks if the subordinate heard anything from their conversation, but nothing was overheard. Setting that aside, Yancey knows his sister has been getting involved in some of the hairiest schemes in the kingdom, considering she was the one responsible for exposing Hector Rold's betrayal. Now, Elodie is regularly exchanging shady words with the boy's mother, Duchess Demis, who used to avoid even looking at the girl. As for their father, Yancey notes that the man used to not give a damn about Elodie, but now he sent Carlet to protect her like a proper guard dog. Something is definitely off. Or perhaps something is not right about something wrong. Whichever way you put it, Yancey has no clue what's going on, and we certainly don't either. As he contemplates this, Yancey pulls a petal from his greasy hair, inadvertently dissolving it with his unruly blessing. The servant suggests they order a new pair of gloves, but Yancey dismisses the idea, saying he plans to head home and burn some more things at the mansion. However, the subordinate is instructed to keep an eye on Lily until further notice. Later, Elodie receives another letter from the Crown Prince. In her first reply, she had made it clear that she wasn't going to send a photo of herself posing seductively in a Corinthians jersey, nor was she attending this dinner with that blockhead. But the issue at hand was something else entirely. Furious once again, Elodie Perdita wonders, why can't anyone leave me alone in this place? Despite all the challenges, Elodie may not always deliver the most ethical or correct solutions, but without a doubt, she's able to deliver some seriously entertaining content. After traveling to the Perdita Palace, a man apologizes for arriving unannounced and for having peed on the living room rug since he couldn't find a bathroom along the way and couldn't hold in the old Barrero booze he'd been storing in his bladder since the start of his journey, especially with that damn card bouncing around on the road like a fish out of water. The reason for this visit was that the traveler had heard that the lady's health remained poor due to her reckless actions, so he decided to show up and catch up with her. Maybe even beg Elodie to come back to him. After all, we're talking about Adamir, the first prince who, of course, hopes Elodie is feeling a little better than the last time he saw her, when the girl was practically having a Chavez-like breakdown every 10 steps, like a Fiat Uno climbing a muddy hill. Well, Elodie responds that she's getting better little by little, but one thing that definitely isn't improving is this weird atmosphere, as it seems this guy wants something quite fishy with all his sweet talking. Oh dear, how are you? This fake sociopath thinks he can get away with anything just because he's got that charming face made by the devil himself. Still, despite it all, the truth is that life is unfair, and beautiful people generally get things more easily than ugly ones. And Elodie knows this all too well, for there stands dear Adamir, affirming that her health is so good now that she can definitely make an appearance at this dinner. Elodie asks what the heck he's talking about, so the guy explains that her own father invited him to this banquet tonight, where her entire family will be present. Adamir believes that the young lady should attend the event unless, of course, she's planning to fake food poisoning or something worse, just like she did last time. Upon hearing about this banquet, Elodie panics, realizing she hadn't booked a hair appointment. Her hair is dried out. She hadn't done her nails, hadn't booked her lashes, hadn't called Aunt Nina to wax her bikini line. Ugh. On top of that, Martha hasn't cut her nails yet. And to make matters worse, her mustache is starting to grow back with little fuzzy hairs sprouting out to curse her further. On top of everything else, she needs at least 8 hours to do her makeup and 3 days to pick the perfect outfit to once again slay in the ballroom. Anyway, With all that in mind, Elodie would rather be watching Fantastico, but when the evening arrives, there's our girl pretending to be a lady at the dinner table, though it seems like she's about to choke on every bite. In the midst of this, Duke Perdia mentions that he's heard news from House Angelos, and they plan to start full-scale production of military supplies soon. Yancey adds that the Duke's deal with the Southern Mage Tower probably led the Angelos to start making magic-infused equipment, especially since they've secured all the magicite mines for producing enchanted armor. Listening in, Elodie reflects that House Angelos is one of the 4 great houses, blessed with restoration, and their leader is Lord Rodrigo Angelos, a sleazy bourgeois who only cares about money and glory. His goal was to crush all the other powerful families and unite them under his own banner, which would undoubtedly make him a magnificent 3-eyed goat with a crown, also known as the King of the Hill. However, there was one massive thorn in Rodrigo's side that prevented him from achieving his desire: Duke Sylvester Perdia. And speaking of the baddest of the bad, Sylvester Perdia declares that he doesn't smell trouble with his strange move by the Angelos. But the issue is that their reach could disrupt the Perdia family's material supply in the long run. Demi suggests that the Duke buy his own mines to secure a supply line, but Adamir fears that won't be possible since House Angelos has already scooped them all up. With a monopoly on this sector, those guys aren't letting go, not even over their dead bodies. In response, Elodie thinks it really won't amount to anything if Sylvester tries to buy a mine from Rodrigo, but either way, House Angelos' downfall is inevitable, and that's set in stone. Ironically, it's carved into a magicite stone, the very resource they're monopolizing. Man, no one lets up on the irony. And this will be a crushing victory for Perdia in the future, with Mr. Roddy Boy begging on his knees before the Master of Masters. Seeing all this coming, this girl loves the fact that she knows the future. Honestly, it must be awesome, even just imagining it. She knows this conflict will get off to a rough start, but Yancey will sort it all out in the end. Noticing that Elodie is zoning out at the table, the Duke calls her out, catching her by surprise. He'd like to hear her opinion on the matter. Startled, the young lady isn't sure how to respond because, until now, she's only ever had to open her mouth to stuff it with food in this wretched house. After all, no one ever cared about what a subservient lady like her thought in this cursed family. Well, before she could answer, Yancey remarks that perhaps Lily doesn't want to discuss such a heavy topic, heavier than the troll penis roast sitting on this dinner table, while they're eating. However, Sylvester gets pissed and reminds Yancey that he didn't ask for his opinion at any point. Yancey lowers his head and apologizes, and the Duke turns back to Lady Elodie Perdia to ask for her thoughts once again. Elodie briefly considers playing dumb, but ultimately decides it's better to score points with her dad in this hellhole. After all, she needs to forge the best possible relationship with Daddy when the time comes for her to disappear from his house for good without saying goodbye. And so, despite Adamir's protest that his future ex-wife would dare oppose him in front of the Perdia family, Lily insists that there's another way. Sylvester wants to know what that is, so the young mastermind gives them a free geopolitics lesson, explaining that House Angelos bought up all the mines and secured a monopoly. So, even though they're one of the founding houses of Valencia, such a massive investment has likely left their coffers empty. And since they hold a monopoly, Elodie suggests that House Perdia should do the same. Carlinos cuts in to call his sister stupid, pointing out that she just said the Angelos bought up all the mines and sat on them. At that, Elodie puts the little brat in his place by explaining that she wasn't talking about the magicite mines. After all, that's not the only resource needed for military equipment production. What they need to do is buy up all the other materials they can because House Angelos has only recently entered the weapons sector, meaning they still have very few suppliers for materials other than magicite. If Perdia makes this investment, Rodrigo will eventually have no choice but to sit down and negotiate a deal with Sylvester. From there, they can sell the materials at sky-high prices to finally squeeze those arrogant fools once and for all. After delivering this masterclass on how to reverse a monopoly and screw over their enemies, Demis applauds with her feet as she continues feasting on troll penis. Elodie wears a smug expression, but the truth is she stole this idea from Yancey, who came up with this strategy in the novel. Either way, this is her moment to bask in the glory of her intelligence, impressing everyone around her as if she were a genius discovering fire, taking all the credit for herself, and that's how it's going to be. In fact, according to Lily, this wine pairs perfectly with nefarious schemes, so she savors the drink while feeling like the Godfather. Based. Adamir, on the other hand, wonders when the hell this crazy woman learned so much about these matters because, as far as he knows, Elodie was just an innocent lady with a room full of absurdly suspicious substances that could definitely be part of some smuggling operation or at least a highly questionable business deal. Plus, she's been acting like a lunatic recently, leading the prince to believe she might have been possessed by a demon, or maybe even Lord Sauron from The Lord of the Rings, to sow chaos wherever she goes. One way or another, Adamir knows something is seriously wrong with this situation.